Hi, I'm Lucy from Sew Essential and I'm here today with a really helpful tutorial how to attach a continuous placket to a shirt or blouse. So this is something that really confused me on a previous pattern. What I mean by continuous placket is I mean a separate neckband piece that is visible on the outside of the garment. So instead of folding in like a facing, it's actually visible from the outside of the garment. It finishes the neck edge of the blouse and then it overlaps here at the front to create the placket where the buttons and buttonholes go, and it finishes just below the waist there. It's quite confusing when you first do one of these. I did a Burda pattern with one of these previously and attached it incorrectly because I was so confused about the way it came together and worked. So I just wanted to demystify that for you today, and this video is packed full of useful tips and techniques along the way as well that you'll find useful whether you use this pattern or a different pattern with this feature on the neckline. It just kind of breaks down and makes sense of some of those bits that can seem really complicated when you sat there looking at some instructions. So the blouse I've used is McCalls 8041, which is available on our website. You'll find links to the pattern and the fabric I'm going to be using today as well below, and anything else I mention as well. But I absolutely love this blouse. It's a really contemporary sort of feel. It's got a lovely yoke across the back. I really like the sort of loose contemporary fit of it, cute cuffs as well, and a cute little collar. So I liked it so much I made it twice, and this is the blouse. It's not quite finished yet, but this is the one I'll be showing you in the tutorial. This beautiful viscose fabric is silky soft, perfect for this blouse and lots of other projects as well, and this is available on our site as well, so I'll link that below as well, along with any other tools that I use today. They'll all be linked below. You'll find them all on our website. If you like what you see today, please like and subscribe, and every Friday I'll bring you a video packed full of sewing goodness. If you can't wait a whole week, do jump on and give us a follow on Instagram as well, where we share posts daily on our feed. So without further ado, let's get cracking with the tutorial. So the first thing we need to do is prepare the bodice piece, because we've actually cut this on the fold, this front bodice piece, and to insert the placket we will eventually need to slash down the centre front. So to prepare the fabric for this, they suggest putting a stitching line along these markings here, and that will just reinforce that area for when you're applying the placket. Now if you have a look, it's just 5/8 of an inch from the centre front, and it's about 3.5 inches down. So if you just mark those points on your fabric, you'll be able to just stitch down that line and pivot at the corner there and just reinforce that area. And I always think when you're doing something, I know a few people have struggled with this placket on this pattern, if you're doing something that seems a bit confusing or you can't make sense of, I always think go back to the pattern pieces, go back and look at the pattern pieces, and if necessary take the pattern piece that will be joining to this pattern piece and lie it on top of it, and it will really help you to visualize how everything's going together. That really helps me whenever I get stuck. So I've marked those points on my fabric. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it in this on the camera, but if you can see there, the centre front of my bodice is there, and I've just made some markings there and there. So I'm going to stitch down, pivot across, and then back up the other side to reinforce that area. So here I have the front bodice piece where I've marked those points for the stitching lines, and then I've also used tailor's chalk just to mark the stitching lines so I can see exactly where I've got to go, which might be helpful for you. I'm going to use the needle up down feature on my machine, which means when I stop sewing the needle will stay down, and that allows me to pivot more easily, and that's a great feature available on lots of modern machines nowadays. We stock plenty of machines with that feature on. If you did want to talk to us about it, just drop us an email. I'm also using this clear foot. It's a bit of an odd foot to use for this task, but I've just tested on some scraps, and for some reason sewing on a single layer of this lightweight viscose fabric, this foot just seems to get better results than my normal clear foot. I think it's because of the amount of contact with the fabric. So I'm just going to use that. but let's just stitch these lines. So this is reinforcing the area where we're going to slash to on that front bodice piece. So if we just start at the top there, you can just use the hand wheel to make sure you're starting at the right point, and then start stitching. This is a very fluid fabric, so you might want to take it easy to make sure you're stitching accurately. And then I'm just coming down to that point now, so you can see every time I stop, my needle goes down, my foot lifts, so I can see exactly where I am and check that I'm in the right place. Just need to make sure I'm not going to sew through the other layer of fabric here. So one more should do it, and then that allows me to turn the fabric and pivot so that I'm now able to sew along the next line. And again, I've hit that point, so I'm now going to pivot and sew back up the other side. Okay, so you can see there we've sewn along those stitching lines and just reinforced that area where we're going to be slashing the pattern. So here is the front bodice piece. You can see the V at the front, and then here are my stitching lines, which won't be very visible to you, but the ones I created earlier are just here. And then what I've done is I've marked the centre front point of that square, and I've just drawn a line with tailor's chalk from the centre front down to that point. That will just dust off. And then I've also marked the point where a 45-degree angle goes from the corner of the stitching line to the centre front line that I've drawn. And now I'm just going to slash down there to the point where I need to do these 45-degree trimming snips. So just bear with me while I do this. So it does feel quite scary cutting into the front of your garment like this, but it will work. It will all come together beautifully, don't you worry. So just take it nice and easy so you're nice and accurate. And then I'm just reaching that point now, so I'm going to stop there, and then I'm just going to snip two, but not through those corners that we created with our stitches. Okay, so you can see there I've split that down the middle, and then here we've created a little triangle in the middle. You might want to go in, because I've just done that for the camera for you guys, I'll probably go in with my little scissors and just make sure I've gone as close to the stitching line as I can with those snips, but I don't want to go through them, and that's how you slash that front piece. Here I have the uninterfaced pieces of the neckband. So you've got the placket that will run along the front of the shirt, round the back of the neck and down the other side. I've sewn it together at the shoulder seams and pressed those seams open. I haven't finished them because it's going to be encased by the facing anyway, so there isn't a need to do that unless you've got a fabric that's really going to fray. Plus this is a lightweight viscose fabric, so you know I want to minimise the bulk there really. So I haven't finished those. I have stay stitched the neckline there, and then I've also prepared my collar, so you can see my collar here. I've got some lovely sharp points on that, and I used my Prim point presser, not point presser, sorry, point turning tool, which allows you to you can just slip that inside and get it right into the corners to push those points out, which I find really helpful. And I also used my clapper, my tailor's point presser and clapper, and you can just slide the collar over the end of the point presser before I've turned it through, like so. When it was still inside out, I slid it over there, and then I was able to press the seams open before I turned it through, and then that gave me a nice sharp finish on the edges there and gave me good pressing results. So both of these tools are available on our site. I'll pop links below to those for you. They're really useful for when you're doing collars, because you do want a nice sharp point on them. So we now need to attach the collar to this uninterfaced neckband. So I've marked the centre back on the neckband, and I've also marked it on the collar as well. And then you want to put the collar with the interface side down and attach it to the neckband. So I'm just going to match those centre back points up. They don't always mark those on the pattern, and I don't know why, because I think it's a really useful marker. And then there's also a notch. It's a little bit confusing, this pattern, or it can be, sort of how far to attach the collar. You know, you might think, oh, I need to attach it to the shoulder seam, but actually, if you think about it, your collar would be far too short. It has got to come down the side here, and there is a little notch that I've marked on the neckband piece, and then you want it to go up to where there's a little kick out on the collar piece, just there. That's your finished edge. So your notches on the collar piece are just about here. So I want to line that up with that notch on the neckband, like so. Doing this, it's a bit awkward. It's always awkward doing things on camera because you do them a different way around to what you normally would. So yeah, I've lined that up there, and then you want to match everything up and pin it in place. If there is any excess fabric in the neckband, you can snip to the stitching line just to relieve that and allow it to stretch to fit, well, not stretch, but to move to fit the collar if necessary. So you can also, if you want to, tack the collar together along this raw edge before doing this. I haven't done it because I'm confident that I'll be able to keep it all in the right place. But if you just want to be extra sure, if you're a little bit nervous about things moving around as you sew, you can always just tack those layers of fabric together before you pin things in place here. So I'm just going to carry on and pin the rest of it and pin it the other side as well. So again, match up that next notch round here. Always really important, especially on a pattern like this where there's lots of odd things to fit together, to make sure that you mark those notches on your fabric so you know where everything's supposed to be lining up. And again, just pin the rest of that to the neckband, just making sure the raw edges line up nice and neatly. And again, if you need to snip into those or to those stay stitches just to release the neckband a little bit so that the collar fits, you can do that. Don't snip through the stitches, obviously just to the stitches. But we've got that attached now, so I can take that over to the sewing machine and sew that together. So now I'm going to sew the collar to the neckband. Just knock one of my pins out of position there. I should have said you can understitch the collar to keep everything nice and neatly in place as well. And I just want to address this sort of kick out area here. So I'm not entirely sure I've interpreted this pattern correctly, but on the diagrams it looks like you're not supposed to attach the collar all the way to the edge of the collar, and there is this little area here that kicks out, which I did on my previous version of this blouse, and I really like the way that it looks. Although it's a bit unusual, I think it helps the collar to hang nicely. However, if you don't want that, instead of stitching across there before you turn the collar through, don't bother, just leave the whole of the notched edge, unstitched, and then you'll be able to bring the collar right to the edge there and just have the collar coming out of the neckband entirely. So it will all become clear when I've finished sewing everything together. I'll show you what I mean, but I did this way, leaving it like so on my last version of the blouse, and I really like the way it looks, so I decided to go with that this time. I just thought it was an unusual little feature, and it is the way the instructions look like it's supposed to be. But if you don't want that feature and you want the collar to attach entirely, you can not stitch that bit and just join it right from the edge. So let's just start by sewing this together then. So I'm sewing with a 5/8 seam. If you do this method, you just need to make sure that your stitching line meets where that finished edge finishes there, so that everything matches up nice and neatly. So you just need to be quite accurate when you're starting that stitching, like so. I mean, it should be at 5/8 anyway, so it should be perfectly fine, but just make sure. But I'm just going to do a couple of back tacks to secure. And then carry on sewing. If you have had to ease anything in as well on the neckline side, you might want to sew from the other side so that you can have control over that. Having said that, you will have snipped to the stay stitching anyway, so it should all be lying flat, so it shouldn't be a problem. And again, I'm just coming around to this little kick on this side, so I want to make sure my stitching finishes at just the right place, just at the corner. Okay, so we've now attached the collar to that neckband, and as I say, you know, I'm not entirely sure I've even interpreted that pattern correctly at that point, but I like the way that it looks on the finished blouse. I liked it last time, so I've chosen to go with that. And I think I like to mention things like that on this video because, you know, sewing isn't about, for me, hard and fast rules. It's about finding what you like and what works for you. So here we have the neckband with the collar attached. You can just tack that in place. I sewed it in place, but you can just tack that in place. But I definitely recommend doing that, because what we're going to do now is we're going to take the interfaced pieces, which have been sewn together at the shoulder seams in the same way, and those seam allowances pressed open, and we're going to put that right sides together with the collar. So you're sandwiching the collar between the two facings, so the neckband and the interfaced facing, your collar is going to be sandwiched between those, and then we're going to pin that in place. And what we're going to do, this is where you'll see how good your cutting out is. Sometimes it might be a little bit sloppy and might not quite match up, but as long as it's not too far off, you should be able to manipulate it and get things to fit together. If you are working with a particularly fluid fabric and you're finding it's quite difficult to get it really accurate, a little tip is to just cut your interfacing pieces out first and iron those onto the fabric and then cut round that, and that helps to get accuracy. I didn't do it on this fabric, so let's hope that my cutting out isn't too far off. It looks fairly good actually, looks okay. So we're going to lie that on top, right sides together with the neckband that we've already attached to the collar, and we're going to pin around this inside edge because we're going to stitch all the way around that inside edge to attach everything together, which is why it's important to have tacked or sewn the collar to the non-interface neckband, because obviously you're going to be at that point working with several layers of fabric. So you just want to match everything up in the same way, matching up your notches and your shoulder seams and your centre back points as you pin that in place. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to start with my shoulder seams. I think I've forgotten to mark the centre back on the interface piece, so you might want to benefit from my mistakes and not do that on your version, because it is useful having that marking. But yeah, if we start at the shoulder seams, get those right and then work from there. And again, if you do need to clip to your stay stitching to just enable you to fit everything together, you can do that. I'm going to pin in place first and then see. I think I do need to release that a little bit, so I'm just going to snip just to that stay stitching, just making sure I'm only going through that layer. And what that does, when you snip like that, it allows you to just manoeuvre it. It gives you sort of more, it makes the fabric able to sort of stretch a further distance. It just relieves it a little bit, so it enables you to match things up. So let's just look at that now. That should pin in place more easily and match up nicely with that edge. Yep, so that's great. Okay, so that's all pinned together now, and we can take that across the sewing machine and just sew everything together through all the layers. Just being careful to make sure, if you have chosen to do the version where you're going to have this little overhang, that you stitch that in the right place. But yeah, we're going to go across and sew that together now. So now I'm going to sew all the way around that inside edge of the neckline facing the neckband and the collar at the top. Just start by back tacking, and I'm going to use my needle up down function again because I'm going around a curve and it just makes it easier for pivoting. I've also got my purple thang here, which is a really useful little inexpensive tool we stock on the website, and that's just useful if I need to manoeuvre around curves and things. I might not need it, so I'm going to put it to one side, but it's there if I need it. Now needle up down is useful for this bit here because we're going round a corner and we want a nice sharp corner here. So I can just leave the needle down, lift the foot up, pivot, and then if I put the foot down I can see I'm not quite far enough along. So I can lift the foot back up, put it back down, do another stitch, check again, and I'm still not far enough along. So if I go back again, put the foot down, just make sure I'm in a nice straight line. I'm going to do another stitch, another two. Hopefully that's enough, and that's perfect. Yeah, so it just gives you that opportunity to manipulate things and manoeuvre and do it in stages. You know, you haven't got to get it absolutely right by eye straight away. Just making sure everything's lying nice and flat underneath as well. Now we're coming up to the collar bit here, so I just want to make sure that I'm stitching to that little outcrop there, which is actually marked. I think I've actually got a marking there for it. So you can see there I've got the nice corners there, which I did by using my pivoting needle up down technique, and then everything sewn through all the layers all the way around, and again another nice sharp corner there for when we turn that through. So the collar is now sandwiched between the facing and the neckband. And what I'm going to do now is just sew an understitch all the way around that edge. So what I mean by that, it's a really useful technique. It's used all the time in construction of garments, and what I need to do is just push the seam allowances towards the facing, which is the interface side, and from the right side I'm going to stitch nice and close to that seam line. And what that will mean then is I'm able to press everything nice and neatly, and the wrong side will stay on the wrong side. So it's a really important technique to learn. It will give you a really nice finish. Some people say to press your seam allowances first then understitch, but I like to understitch first then press, because I think if you press first, I don't know, I just prefer to do it that other way, but you can do it whichever way you like. But I just feel that if you do the understitching first then press, you can make sure that everything, the understitching is hidden away nicely and everything's sitting as you want it to. So let's just start. So I'm pushing the seam allowances towards the facing side, and I'm going to sew with my 1/4 inch foot. I just like using this because it's got lots of markings on it, so I can make sure the stitches are nice and even, an even distance away from the seam line. And you can just very gently just pull the fabric slightly away from each other while you sew and understitch, but very gently. You don't want to stretch the fabric. So you're going to sew about 1/16 and 1/8 from the edge of the seam line. So I'm just going to keep fiddling until I'm happy. Okay, secure with the back tack, and then off we go. So as you go, just make sure your seam allowances are still sitting on the right side. Okay, so you can see there we've got a nice neat understitch all the way around the edge, and that will just really help the facing to sit nice and neatly on the inside. And when we go and press that now, it will be easy to press accurately along the seam line and make sure that the facing stays on the inside of the blouse. Okay, so I've now pressed everything to the right side. So we've got the facing here, you can see that line of understitching there, and we've got the what will be the right side on the garment here, and it's all pressed really nicely thanks to that understitching that I showed you earlier. And then I've also just tacked, they did suggest on the pattern just tacking the raw edges together, which I think is a good idea again to make sure that things don't move when you're sewing the band to the blouse. So I've done that. And then if you look on the pattern piece, it says to sew a little stitch 5/8 from the edge just in this corner here to just reinforce that corner. So where the band sort of juts out here, you can see there it goes out in a almost concave convex V. Had to think about that then. Just at the corner here they suggest stitching 5/8 from the edge, and then you're going to clip to that. So if I look on this side, I've actually marked it on here. I've marked with a little cross. There's a little circle on the pattern piece which I'll just show you. So if we just move that out of the way, here there's a little circle just as you go around that corner. That's where you need to pivot, so you just want to stitch 5/8 from the edge along here and then pivot at that point and along there, just, you know, for an inch or so either side, and then you're going to clip to that circle just to be able to maneuver the band to fit the blouse and fit the neckline. So I'm just going to do that now. Just need to put my stitch back to a normal length because I was on a tacking stitch. So I've got my little marking, I've got a little cross marked in tailor's chalk. You might not be able to see it, but I'm just going to start here and stitch up to that point. A little bit further, again using up down, needle up down, and then turning the corner and just stitching a little bit of a way along the other side. Probably don't actually need to secure that because obviously this is going to be encased in the seam allowances eventually, but I'll just show you that side. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see the stitching line, but yeah, I've just sewn a row of stitches along there and turn the corner, and then I'm going to repeat on the other side. So it's a bit more visible here because we've got some white parts of the fabric there, but there's my pivot point there. So I'm just going to snip to that with these little scissors now. So from the side just to that point through all the layers, and that will allow me to attach the neckband to the blouse. So I'm just going to do the same on the other edge. So if we find that pivot point again and just snip to it, and again you can see how I'll be able to manoeuvre that now to fit it to the neckline of the blouse, which is the next bit I'm going to show you. So now I've sewn the front bodice to the back bodice at the side seams and shoulder seams, and we're going to attach the neckband, which is what this tutorial's focused on. So here you can see we've got the slashed bodice piece, the centre front. I've sewn reinforcing stitches around the slash at the bottom before we slashed it. You won't be able to see those stitches, but I'm just identifying where they are with this pencil so you can see those. And then we've snipped to the corners to create this little flap at the bottom, which will help us to attach the neckband at the bottom. And when we look at the neckband, it can be a bit counterintuitive. I think this is the bit that confuses a lot of people with one of these patterns. As a sewer, we look at that shape on the neckband where it goes round the corner and you think, oh okay, yeah, I can see how that's supposed to fit together. Here's the edge of the neckline. So here's the edge of the neckline. If I just follow that curve for you so you can see it with a pencil, you would think, there's the edge of the neckline, you would think, oh okay, yeah, I need to sew that to there like so, match those shapes up, and that's how it works. But actually, if you think about it, this neckband's going to be visible from the right side of the garment, and if you turn that through, you're going to end up with the wrong edge protruding the garment. So actually it's counterintuitive, but what you need to do is put it right sides together, and you want that corner coming towards the other side of the garment, lining up with the raw edge. You want this area where we've sewn the reinforcing stitches and we've snipped to the reinforcing stitches, and you line that up with that corner like so, and then when you turn it through to the right side, you will have that nice neat finished edge to finish the neckline of your garment. So it can be a little confusing because normally when a facing's turned to the inside of a garment, you would match the shapes up, but actually you're doing the opposite here. And it's just thinking about, well, what's going to be visible on the outside of the garment? Actually, it's going to be the neckband. So we need that nice finished edge to be on the outside once we've stitched everything in place and turned it through. And I think if ever you are getting confused with anything like that, just try pinning where you're going to sew and turn it through and look, does that work? You know, that will give you a good idea. Or the other thing is you could go back to the pattern pieces and use the notches and various markings on the pattern pieces to match them up and just try and understand how it's supposed to work. That's what I like to do if ever anything's foxing me. So I'm just going to pin this now to the neckline. I have stay stitched the back of the bodice neckline as well. I've done that just so that I can snip into that if I need to when I'm attaching the neckband. But I'm going to match that up. I'm going to match up my notches on the neckline. And then the other important thing to be aware of is that your neckband should protrude those stitches at the bottom, those reinforcing stitches where this little flap and triangle of fabric is. The neckband should protrude that or extend beyond that, because you've got to finish that bottom edge there as well. But we're going to start by attaching the neckband and just finishing all around from here all the way around the neckline down the other side, and we want to stitch along those reinforcing stitches or just outside of them, and we want to stop at the corner. Now, to be nice and accurate with that, my plan is I'm going to, once I've got it pinned in place, I'm just going to use some tailor's chalk. I can feel where those stitches are, and I'm just going to mark, because this is the wrong side of the neckband because I've placed it right sides together. I'm going to feel where those stitches are and just mark it with tailor's chalk so that I can see I just need to stitch just outside of that line. So I'm going to go ahead and attach that now with pins in the usual way, and I've got my scissors handy so I can just snip that neckline if I need to at the back. The other thing I should mention as well that can be a bit confusing when you've got one of these neckbands that's going to be visible from the right side of the garment is that when you sew a lot of sewing patterns, you attach a neckline, a neckline facing at the neckline, and usually if the facing is turned inside the garment so it's not visible, the shortest edge of the facing is the one that you attach to the neckline. But actually, if you're sewing a pattern like this where you're going to have a band that's visible on the outside of the garment, you'll be sewing the longest side of the facing to the neckline, because obviously the blouse will be attached there, and then you'll have this band of fabric, and then your collar finishes and matches up with that shorter edge. So that can be a little bit confusing sometimes as well, so I just thought I'd mention that as well in case that's helpful. So I'm going to go ahead now and just match up all my notches, match my shoulder seams, make sure the neckband extends beyond the reinforced stitches at the bottom, and pin it in place right sides together. So I'm just going to snip to the stay stitching on the neckline so I can get that to fit the collar. Okay, so we're all attached there now. I've pinned that all the way around the edge, as you can see. That's all pinned in place. I've made sure that the neckband is extending those reinforced stitching lines at the end, so I've got something to finish off that bottom edge and to work with there. And I'm just going to do what I said with those reinforced stitches, because obviously we don't want those to be visible on the garment, so I need to stitch either directly along them, and I need to stop right at that corner as well. So I'm just going to use my tailor's chalk to mark where that stitching line is and where that corner is, where I need to stop. So I can just feel that there. So I've just marked that with a little cross. You won't be able to see that probably. I do apologise for that, but if I just draw now along that stitching line, I know that I've got to either sew bang on that line or just slightly outside it so that I hide those stitches and just get everything nice and accurate. And as I said, if you can't feel it, you could always use pins. It doesn't matter about marking the fabric on this side because that's going to be inside the garment anyway. So I'll just repeat that on the other side and then we'll take it over to the machine and sew everything in place. So I'm about to attach the neckband to the bodice, and I've marked that corner point where the end of the reinforcing stitching finishes, and I've got my needle in exactly the right place there. I also marked it with a pin, so I'm just going to sew a fixed stitch there. I don't want to do a reverse stitch because I'm worried that I might go over the line slightly. So I'm just going to sew a fixed stitch and then attach the rest of the neckband and just stay just slightly outside of that reinforced stitching line. I'm beyond the reinforced stitches now, so I can just sew and breathe normally until I get to the other side where I'll do the same thing again. Okay, so the neckband is attached. I've done fixed stitches at the corners, matching up with that reinforcement stitching underneath. And as I went round the corners as well, I just made sure, I tried to make sure that the reinforcement stitching that we'd put there, I'd stitch just outside that as well. So we'll turn it through now and then I'll show you how to finish the bottom. Okay, so we're really starting to get there now. We've got the neckband attached. I just want to show you as well, I have on the pattern, they suggest sewing a second row of stitching 1/4 of an inch away from your stitching line, but I've chosen to overlock the edge instead. I just think it gives a neater finish. Obviously, if you haven't got an overlocker, you can sew that second row of stitching 1/4 of an inch away and then trim it down to that point like they suggest on the pattern. But if you have got an overlocker, you can just turn the neckband away like that and just sew the stitches like I've done, and I've cut quite a lot of the excess off, so it's made it really nice and neat inside. I'm really happy with that finish. And then the other thing I thought I'd mention as well, when I was talking about stitching down the reinforcement stitches, you know, it is absolutely crucial that you are spot on when you get to the corner bit and that you stop in the absolute correct place in the corner where you've snipped to, because otherwise you won't be able to do the next step properly. Along here, if you're a little bit outside, that's okay, you know, it's not going to be an issue, but when you get to the corner, you've got to stop bang on where that corner is, where you sewed the reinforcement stitches. And if you're really struggling, one thing you could do is you could tack the neckband in place first, and then you could always just sew this section from the wrong side. So you sew along those reinforced stitches, those reinforcement stitches that we originally sewed on the bodice, just to do that section, and then you could sew the rest of it from the other side, you know, as I did. Just a couple of ideas really if you're struggling with that bit. But yep, so everything's attached now, so it's really taking shape. Let's just put it back on the table. Now the next step, we've got to sort this bottom bit out. So we've got a nice neat neckband. I've pressed everything as well. I've pressed the seam allowances to the blouse, towards the blouse. And we've got this lovely neat finish down the sides here, but then we've got these flappy bits at the end here, so we've got to work out what we're going to do with those. So I'm going to take the blouse and turn it inside out, and then they suggest, so we've got that, if you remember, we've got that little triangle of fabric. I might just slip a piece of paper under here so you can see a bit more clearly. So down at the bottom here, let's just put that in the middle. We've got the two neckband pieces, and we've got this little flap of triangle of fabric there. So what we need to do is overlap one of the neckband pieces over the other. I'm doing this upside down, so it's foxing me and confusing me. But I think we want that one. We're going to have the little flap of the little triangle flap sort of hanging loose there, and then we want to overlap the neckband like so, and then that will allow us to sew along that last little row of reinforced stitches, the reinforcement stitches that we originally sewed along the bottom of that triangle. So if you line everything up, pin it in place, in fact we'll pin it from the other side because that will be easier for you to see, and also I will be able to follow those reinforced stitches. So if I pin it like that, you can see there what I've done. So I've overlapped the two bands and I've just pinned along that stitching line there, because that's where we want to sew, along that stitching line that we sewed before. And then just to double check you've got it right, as I said before, if you're not 100% sure and you're a bit worried about whether everything's going to turn out the way you want it to, just turn it through to the right side, and you can see there that where I've pinned it, that's perfect. That will finish that little bottom section off beautifully. That will be nice and neat, and the neckbands will sit like so. And then eventually, I'm not going to show you in the video today because this is all about the neckband, this tutorial, but I'll sew my buttons along the placket and my buttonholes, and that will be that section of the blouse finish. So I'm just going to take it over to the sewing machine now, and we'll get that last little step finished, and then that will be it for the tutorial. Okay, so you can see here we've got that little triangle section. I've pinned through the two neckband pieces, and now I'm just going to stitch over that original line of reinforcing stitches, making sure that I start and stop bang on that corner again using a fixed stitch. Going to remove that pin. Just taking it nice and slow to make sure I'm nice and accurate. Difficult because normally I'd have my head right over the foot, but because of you guys, I want you guys to be able to see what I'm doing. I'm sort of trying to keep my head out of the way for you. Just lift the foot and just have a look if I made it to the corner. I think I could, I think that should do it. And then I'm going to reverse stitch at this end. Okay. So that is all secured and sewn now in place along that reinforcement stitches line. And what I'll do now as well is I'll just finish this edge off with my overlocker as well. I'll just neaten that up, and then if I show you the other side, you can see, quite lucky that it was a white bit of the fabric against the green where it finishes. You can see we've got that finished now nice and neatly. Give that a press and we've got a lovely neat square finish there. So it's all worked out. So I'll just overlock the edges, as I said, of that, and that is the tutorial finished. I think I got a bit overexcited there. I did forget one last step that I would recommend. I'm not going to show you this step because it's just you know, it was really the main construction I was focusing on for this tutorial, but they do suggest on the pattern just doing a little square of stitches and crossing them over in the middle just to secure that and reinforce everything in that corner. So they show you on the pattern piece to just stitch round the edges nice and close to the seam line and then just cross it over as a reinforcing feature. So I will be doing that as well. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it demystified things for you, made sense of a lot of things for you. And as always, just remember everything I talked about today is available on our lovely website, so do jump on and have a look and check out the links below as well. And if you like what you see today, please like and subscribe, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.